Hey, this is Meridith Elliott Powell, and welcome to Thriving in Uncertainty, the show where we dive into the strategies, we discuss the steps, everything that you need to know to turn all of this uncertainty to your competitive advantage. And listen, today I have a very special guest, somebody I am lucky enough to call a good friend, Allison Shapira. Allison, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Meredith. Such a pleasure to be with you.
Well, as I do with all of my guests, rather than have me try to flub through an intro on you, we like to start off by having you tell us a little bit about your story, who you are, exactly what you do, and give us a little bit of a hint about how 2020 was for you.
I'd be happy to. My background is as an opera singer. So I call myself a former or recovering opera singer. And that was my introduction to public speaking. It came through performing on stage and then learning how to pivot those skills from performing to public speaking. So I've been teaching public speaking and presentation skills for about 18 years now, which is amazing to think about. And I have a team of trainers and coaches, and we work with companies all around the world with a focus on leadership communication. As you move up in your career, what communication skills do you need to be effective as you go from being in the room to leading the meeting with the client or internally with your leadership team. So that's what we do. We're based in Washington, D.C. And let's see, how did 2020 affect us? Well, in mid-March, 95% of our business disappeared. Completely was either postponed or canceled. And we had just hired 2 new full-time staff people. And we were paying rent on an office that we couldn't go into. So it was very scary at that time. Luckily, I teach a course at the Harvard Kennedy School, and that was moved from in-person to virtual exactly in the middle of March. So I was thrown into virtual training, which I had been doing for years, but none of us did this with the same frequency and intensity that we're all doing it now. So we pivoted very, very quickly. Within 2 weeks, all of our in-person training and coaching and keynote programs were converted to virtual. And we have been leading these virtual programs ever since. And now we're busier than ever.
Well, that's fantastic. And I really had no doubt. Listen, I want to tell you why I wanted to have you on. I mean, just the fact that I think you're brilliant and I think you would make a great guest. Communication to me, when it comes to uncertain times, is one of the most critical things that you need to do well if you're going to navigate an uncertain marketplace. So let me just start there. I mean, why is communication so important?
That's such a huge question, and it's a fantastic question. And the answer why communication is so important is because it determines our relationships with others, whether it's a personal or a professional relationship. Our ultimate goal is to build trust with and connect with one another. And the way that we do that is primarily through our communication. It could be our oral communication, our written communication, but it's not enough to be good at what we do. It's not enough to know our subject matter. If we can't put it into clear, concise, authentic language, then we're missing an opportunity to connect. And connection leads to engagement, which leads to trust, which in a professional setting leads to business.
Absolutely. So what are what are some of the biggest challenges that since we have gone virtual, what are some of the biggest challenges that, your clients, as well as just people in general, are having when it comes to communicating? And, communication to me is not a big enough word to describe what you do, because you really talk about influence and you talk about persuasion, and that is making an impact on people. So maybe let's start there. Maybe let's talk a little bit more about, really from your perspective in the world, the work that you do, what communication really means.
It means everything that you've described, which is so important. It's not simply about having someone give you talking points and then reading them from a PowerPoint. That's how people think about communication. Communication is first and foremost looking inward to determine, why am I called to speak? why do I care about this audience and the work that I do? How do I craft a persuasive message that will have an impact on them? And then how do I engage them in the delivery of that message so that I can achieve my goals and they can achieve their goals? So a lot of people tend to think communication is that thing you throw on after you come up with strategy, but it's an integral part of your strategic planning process. How you craft the message then determines your ability to communicate it.
So when we went virtual and we're all now having to communicate like you and I are communicating right now, and on some level we've been incredibly lucky that the technology, was there, because it certainly has made what we've been through this last year a lot easier to bear, because at least we could still talk and communicate. What have been some of the biggest challenges that people have had around trying to communicate and connect in a virtual world?
There are two main challenges that I see people face. The first are personal challenges. We are overworked. There is no work-life balance. We're giving way too many presentations. We're on Zoom or WebEx or Teams, whichever platform, too much. And it's causing us to feel overwhelmed. And we're worried about our health, our families. We have to hold it together for our teams. And I mentioned this personal component because our emotional state of mind affects our professional capabilities, affects our ability to lead others and set a positive example to others. So the personal is one huge challenge we're all facing. The second challenge is in the realm of the professional. Now, I work with a lot of professionals in sales, and I know that you do as well. And many sales professionals have spent 20, 30 years crafting their in-person communication skills. They have this very defined set of tools that have made them successful, for which they've been chosen and promoted. And last year, those tools disappeared. And they had to completely master a new set of tools. And guess what? Their sales goals hadn't changed. Their targets hadn't changed. And yet now they had to master these new tools immediately when they'd spent 20 years mastering the previous tools. So the biggest challenge I see professionals face is delivering the same value, making the same connections, making the same impact in a virtual setting when that's not what they're naturally good at. And helping them upskill to get to that stage is where I have spent every waking working hour since March 15th.
Do people realize that they need to make the shift? Do you feel like it's common knowledge amongst all of us that communicating in a virtual world is very different than communicating and connecting in a traditional one? I ask that because I feel like a lot of the messages and things that I get tend to feel a little bit more like they were traditional. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I was engaging with somebody who I thought was just reaching out to connect with me, and they pitched me at the end of the conversation. I never saw that coming from a sales perspective. But I thought, wow, if we'd been on the golf course or at a trade show, maybe that would have felt more comfortable. But really, across a Zoom, it felt like too much too fast.
I can absolutely understand that happening. And that leads back to understanding the nuances that exist in a virtual setting that didn't exist in person. So we have fewer tools at our disposal. Beforehand, we could go out on the golf course or the tennis court or do something that was that blend of personal and professional. And now it's all over video conference. And so how do we create the space for the personal, and then how do we blend seamlessly into the professional, which, as you know, was always important in the in-person setting, but perhaps we had a better sense of timing because we could read the body language and the response and the energy of the person we were meeting with in person. Now in a virtual setting, it's harder to read that energy. It's harder to get that energy back, both as a speaker or as a participant in a meeting or presentation. So we have to develop a new sense of timing and rhythm, a new skill set, and a new way of acting that can still be impactful. And many people recognize the need, which is fantastic. but many times they don't. And sometimes the people who need it aren't the ones who sign up for training or aren't the ones who are making the decisions about training. So we have to both educate others and give them an opportunity to recognize in themselves that this is critical. And it's usually when they realize they can't hit the same goals that they hit before unless they invest in improving their own skills. That's when they start to become serious about this. This is not a nice to have. This is a serious competitive advantage and how you will achieve success in 2021 and going forward.
So in a virtual world, because I do agree with you, I mean, I think this is here to stay. I mean, part of it is the fact that we've all realized we're more efficient this way. The other is it's sort of been nice not to be on planes as often as we used to be on planes, and that you can, again, just be more productive in this type of environment. I mean, I think we'll get back to some in-person because we're human beings. We want to connect like that. But you getting good at being on camera and communicating this way. So what are some of the skills we need? What are some things that we need to think about doing differently and kind of add to our repertoire if we're going to make this a competitive advantage?
And are you asking what are some of the tools that we need to be able to do effectively in a virtual meeting or presentation?
Yes.
Great. A number of elements that we can control and that we can easily control. The first is where we look and where we set our camera lens. So we have our camera lens at eye level. We're looking directly into it. That is something that in March of last year, people weren't as comfortable with. Now there's no excuse not to do it, because the goal is to make your audience of one or many feel like you're having a one-on-one conversation with them. And you do that by looking directly into the camera lens and by having it at eye level so you're not hunched over looking down at a screen. So that's something everyone can easily do. Sometimes we have to put a couple boxes on top of our desk in order to do that. Whatever you need to do is fine. So that's the first step. The second step is to recognize that engagement and interaction are different in person than in a virtual setting, and they need to be more planned and more intentional. In person, you can sense when your audience's energy is lagging or when they're unhappy about something that you've put forward. And it's easy to pause, look around the room, and then react and say, I'm sensing there's some hesitation. What do you think? And you can do that seamlessly. In a virtual setting, we've got our notes on one screen. We're looking into the camera lens, which means it's harder to read the room, even if we set it up in gallery view. So we have to be more intentional in preparing our presentation, in putting in stopping points, and then engaging our audience in very specific ways. Anyone who's ever been in a meeting with 5 or more people on Zoom and said, "What do others think?" has immediately realized that that doesn't work, because you have 5 or more people jumping in at the same, oh, you go, oh, no, you go, oh, no, you go first. And that doesn't make a very professional impression. So in a meeting where you have 4 or more people, there must be a facilitator. There must be, in order to keep it a productive conversation. And as you preparing a presentation, need to understand, what are you going to do every 5 minutes to make sure people are engaged? And it's not yes or no, even though it could be yes or no, nod your head if you agree, but it could be, more importantly, in the chat, what do you think about this? Who's dealt with this and what have you found? Or let me stop here. What questions does this raise? Use the raise hand feature or the old-fashioned raise your hand. We have to be very prescriptive about audience engagement, not because we want to be overly formal, but because we want to be effective, and effectiveness requires advanced strategy and preparation.
So that was going to be one of my questions. It is every 5 minutes. I've got to think about some way to kick it out of my audience and get them involved in the conversation.
I mean, the 5 minutes is one particular guideline, but it depends. It always depends on the audience, the nature of the presentation. If I'm doing an introduction to a new group, or if I'm speaking to an audience for the first time and I make them listen for 5 minutes, that could be too long.
Yeah.
because they're already starting to multitask and they're getting notifications. So we understand that in a virtual setting, there's much more competition for our audience's attention. When I say audience, again, it could be an all hands meeting, or it could be one important client. They've got their phone. They might have their cat or their dog walking around in the room, a family member. So how do we compete for that attention? By bringing in their engagement. And I'm a trainer by background, so I always think like a trainer. The more the audience is speaking, the more they're learning, the more engaged they are, the more effective we'll be.
And when it comes to, I think that's really important, because I don't want our listeners to miss this. As you said, to intentionally think about engagement. So that means to not get in front of the camera and just wing it, but really start to think down through your information. At what points are you going to bring people in? How are you going to bring them in? And then how are you going to make sure that it's effective? I really don't want people to lose that. But let's talk a moment about, I'm so curious about the meeting or a sales presentation, and these could possibly be different. But if I have some semblance of connection and relationship with the person that I'm talking with, and we've got a 30-minute meeting scheduled, what is sort of the flow of that meeting? Is there need still at the beginning for rapport and and connection like I would do in person, or is there some type of different expectation in a virtual world?
There is the same expectation of rapport building virtually as there is in person. In fact, it's even more important because we tend to get more formal when we're in a virtual setting. So we do need that rapport building. It doesn't need to be very long, but I do like to ask people every time I speak with them virtually, where in the world are you? Because you could be anywhere. You could be at your parents' house because you're working there for a couple months. You could be at your in-laws' house. You could have gone to work remotely in another state for 6 months. So it's a fun way of connecting with people. I do like that initial rapport building. And then I very much recommend an agenda, agreeing on an agenda, even if it's somebody that you know already, because the amount of meetings we are having right now is incredible. Although we're saving time on airplanes and we're not sitting in traffic for 2 hours each way, all of that free time has now been transitioned into more meetings and more meeting preparation. So it's not like we have all this time in the morning and the evening anymore. We just start earlier and we work later. So that's why we have to be super respectful of people's meeting fatigue, of all the information they're receiving, of how much they're on all the time. And that's on our own side and on the side of our audience. They are tired. And so the more we can, after the initial welcoming and how are you, that wellness check that we started doing, it's now, here's what I thought we could cover. I thought we would cover A, B, C. How does that work for you? Is there anything you'd add? Okay, great. Let's dive in. And then we move through the agenda. And that's always been an effective tool for running meetings. But now it's even more important because, to my earlier point, there's so much going on. We're getting notifications, etc. So the more organized we are, the more respect we're showing for our audience's time.
So let's answer, keeping that, having the agenda. I love the idea of having an agenda, setting that out. It really gives people an understanding of, because one thing that's driving me crazy right now is you get meeting notices and sometimes they're 30 minutes, sometimes they're an hour, but a lot of times they don't match the exact time of the meeting. Now, it's not so much of a challenge when the meeting was scheduled longer than it actually runs, but the flip is really problematic when I think I'm going to be on for 30 minutes and the next thing I know I'm going 45 or 50. So, but the question I have around, I get this a lot. How do you get people to turn their camera on? Because the truth is, we are all sitting there multitasking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. And I would say for many meetings, I would prefer the camera to be off because I want to get up and walk around. I want to fold laundry. I'm still listening. Not if I'm the one speaking, certainly, and not if I'm having a conversation. But there are a lot of times where my movement actually makes me more engaged rather than sitting here in front of the camera feeling like I can't go anywhere. So I will start by saying, recognize first and foremost when we don't need the camera.
Nice.
Can you do it as a phone call? Can you do it as a walking call where each of you goes for a walk? Yes, there's background noise, but you're getting more energy. So that's the first question. Do we need it to be on camera? If the answer is yes, then how do we get everyone to be on camera? We do it by first and foremost socializing it in advance with them. We learned in our trainings, we need to let people know we don't do webinars. This is not going to be a webinar. This is an interactive, high impact, high intensity virtual training experience. Your ability to learn and get feedback from your colleagues will come from you being on camera. So we socialize that in advance. We have also learned, by the way, if you're going to ask them to stand up, let them know. Because we did an exercise once, a breathing exercise, where I said, okay, everyone stand up. And they said, do I have to? So socialize it in advance, and then let them know why. Again, if they don't have to be on camera, they don't have to. Or if there are certain times when we ask you to be on camera. If there's a breakout group, we will ask you to be on camera so that you can be present and fully engage. And I'll say, if I want people to be on camera so that I can give you the right amount of energy, I will ask you to be on camera so that you can appropriately give me your reactions so that I can read my audience more effectively. It is impossible to read the audience when you can't see them. Yeah. It's not technically true. There are ways, but you are less effective at reading the audience when you can't see them, because then you have no verbal cues to read.
Wow, it is hard to believe, but we have come to the end of this podcast. Tell us, so 2 quick questions. Number 1, how do people get a hold of you? Because I think you have the most powerful and innovative information about really understanding how to communicate, how to connect, how to influence, and how to persuade, whether you're doing it in person or virtually. And then leave our audience with your biggest piece of advice of how to really communicate more effectively in today's environment.
The first answer at how to stay in touch with me is to visit my website, AllisonShapira.com. And I have a number of videos available on how do you speak effectively over camera. There are probably 15 different learning videos that you can watch. You can also download a free chapter of my book, Speak with Impact, which is just as relevant now as it was pre-COVID as well. The second question, which is, what's one important takeaway to help you connect with your audience? I'm actually going to give you 2 because I really like both of these. The first is quick. Pause and breathe. We have to be able to self-regulate in order to transmit our best self across a camera. If you do one thing in between meetings, back-to-back meetings, pause and breathe. And then ask yourself the question, why you, as it relates to the next meeting? Not why are you qualified? Not where did you go to school? Those are external validators. Why you means, why do you care about this next meeting, about the audience, about the work that you do? Because what I find rejuvenates us in the middle of these virtual meetings is refinding our sense of purpose. That helps us sit up a little taller, makes our eyes and our voice and our gestures more engaged. And that helps us transmit our best self to our audience instead of our tired and is it over yet self to the audience. Pause and breathe. Remind yourself why do you care?
Oh, I love that. Pause and breathe. If we all didn't need to pause and breathe just a little bit more through everything, and then remind yourself why. Why do I care? Because it is emotionally how you are connecting with people. Allison, thank you so much for being here. I really hope we can bring you back. I have about 1,000 more questions I would like to ask. And again, I want to thank our audience for joining us for another episode of Thriving in Uncertainty, the show where we dive into the strategies, discuss the steps, steps give you everything that you need to know to turn all of this uncertainty to your competitive advantage. All right, we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much.